Hey everyone, Rich Lowry of National Review here. Hey, it's finally happened. President Trump and congressional Republicans have actually cut off federal funding for public broadcasting. This is something the GOP has sought to do for about 40 years without success, and it's finally now happening. Cue the celestial angels and the singing and the celebrations. All right, so some basic facts here. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which provides federal funding to NPR and PBS and to local affiliates around the country, gets about $500 million a year from the federal government. Now, NPR and PBS, they talk out of both sides of their mouths on this. Sometimes they make it sound like federal funding, not a big deal. It's a trifle. We're very self-supporting. We're NPR. We only get about 2% of our funding from the federal government. We're PBS. We only get about 15% of ours from the feds. Other times, they sound like this is extremely dire. It's going to be a catastrophe. There's no way public broadcasting can survive without federal funds. And that was very much the mode that Catherine Mayer, the CEO of NPR, was in when she was fighting this funding cutoff. She was on CNN making the case. Check out this clip where she's talking about NPR's supposed objectivity.
As far as the accusations that we're biased, I would stand up and say, please show me a story that concerns you, because we want to know and we want to bring that conversation back to our newsroom.
So there it is. If there's just one piece of content out there that isn't straight down the middle, she wants to know about it because that'd be such an anomaly and the whole operation would be so concerned about it. Give me a break. This is obviously preposterous. And the first piece of evidence for it is Mayer herself. How did she end up the CEO of NPR, this incredibly woke woman that had all these absurd ex-posts over the years about white complicity and white silence and how Donald Trump is a racist and how the First Amendment is a problem and how great the BLM riots were and how terrible it was that people were valuing private property over social justice, and on and on and on. And she ended up the CEO of NPR for a reason, because that's the kind of person NPR is comfortable with, in fact, wants to be leading it. And obviously, everyone knows this is left of center news and entertainment for a left of center audience. By a 6-to-1 ratio, the audience is more progressive than conservative. The whistleblower Yuri Berliner, who wrote this famous essay for the Free Press, went and looked at the editorial positions in the D.C. Bureau and found there were 87 registered Democrats and 0 registered Republicans. That's a goose egg. None. That doesn't happen by accident. And this pervades everything NPR and PBS do. It's just not the news and information, it's the entertainment, because the worldview is that of a Vermont bookstore, and they can't see past that. Maybe she believes, Mayer, that they really are unbiased, which is damning in itself, because it shows that she is in her own little left of center bubble and can't see beyond it. Does anyone remember ever hearing someone on NPR who was genuinely pro-Trump, a commentator, a host? That's 45, 50% of the country totally ignored, totally unrepresented. That's fine if you want to do that, if you're in the New York Times or the CBS, but if you're publicly funded, you should be different, and NPR and PBS manifestly are not. So let's just take that argument off the table. Another one she made, and other supporters of public broadcasting made, that's equally absurd, is that they are all about emergency notifications. That's the name of the game. Take a look at this clip.
But I think that the place where we're seeing the most traction is senators who represent communities where there are large rural communities, large tribal communities, in particular in places like Alaska, where there just isn't a lot of other options. Broadband service is not universal, and heck, even cell phone service is not universal. There's a real understanding of the need there, as well as for emergency alerting, in which public media plays an extraordinarily important role.
Really? That's what she's going to go with. We all know that NPR and PBS disproportionately cater to affluent, urban, highly educated audiences. And here she's turning it around saying, when their funding is under threat, it's all about rural communities, and not just about rural communities, about emergency response and notification. Give me a break. The New York Times mentioned the other day one of these communities that's supposedly going to be threatened if its NPR station closes, Pendleton, Oregon. I looked it up on the internet, a site that tracks how many radio stations are available in a given community. I think there are 41 stations that have a signal that theoretically reaches Pendleton, and some of these stations are in Pendleton itself. So the idea that if the NPR station doesn't exist and the classic rock station's not going to mention a tornado or a blizzard is heading towards town is ridiculous. Also, people do have cell phones. People do have landlines, and they can be called during emergency. There are other TV stations and radio stations. So the idea that NPR exists to basically be a gigantic ham radio that America can use in a crisis is totally absurd, right? They're providing news and entertainment. Now they want to portray themselves as the radio equivalent of FEMA. The fact is, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is an anachronism. This whole system is dated. It goes back to 1967 and the Great Society. CPB signed into law by Lyndon Baines Johnson when we lived in a completely different world. No streaming services, no internet, no Substack, no Netflix, no YouTube, no social media, all these other means of getting information out and for people to entertain themselves and to download entertainment or view or stream entertainment didn't exist. They do now. So another of the arguments that we'll hear is, look, these places, you might not like their bias, or you may disagree with us about whether they're biased or objective or not, but they do good journalism. You know, people at All Things Considered, they're pretty good. People at the PBS NewsHour, they're pretty good. Might not agree with all of it again, but there's some good stuff on there. Sure, yeah, that's true. Again, you got to put the bias aside, but there's some good content on there. But there's also some good content that airs on NBC, right? Even though that's biased, but NBC doesn't get federal tax dollars, and neither should NPR and PBS. And then they'll make the argument, well, this is what people favoring government programs always say, it's all about the children. It's all about the kids. What about our children's programs? And yeah, PBS has done some good ones over the years. Most iconically, of course, Sesame Street. Who doesn't like an 8'2" yellow bird? But the idea that in this day and age, the only way to get quality children's programming is for the federal government to fund it makes zero sense. You got Blue Clues from Nickelodeon, for instance, and all sorts of other quality children's programming, Peppa Pig, Bluey, all of it created without PBS. And by the way, if PBS went away tomorrow, Sesame Street would still exist. Someone else would pick up Sesame Street. In fact, over the last decade or so, the first run of Sesame Street has been appearing on HBO or HBO Max or Netflix. That kind of arrangement would continue. So I think Big Bird is going to be fine. Finally, if NPR and PBS content is as compelling, is as indispensable as it's portrayed, well, then it should be pretty easy to go out and find other means of support besides the federal government. Find more corporate sponsorships. Go out and get more foundation support. Go out and find more wealthy philanthropists. Get your devoted listeners and viewers to give a little bit more. NPR is giving out a lot of tote bags over the years. Give out some more. The fact is that you never deserved federal funding, never should have gotten it. You gotten it for about 50 years. Be content with that. Be satisfied with that. Be happy that that went on for decades and decades, and then learn to adapt like the rest of us in the media who aren't dependent on government support. Good night and good luck.